In this lecture, we'll learn about the Nav component. Navs can be styled with tabs and pills, and they can have drop-down and pane functionality. A nav component can be structured as either an unordered list or a group of links. To create a nav component structured as an unordered list, we first create an empty nav element. Inside this, we put a URL tag with the class nav. Inside this, we create a list item with the class nav item. The content of this list item will be an anchor tag with an empty href attribute for the purpose of this example and the class nav link. We give it the text link and duplicate it 3 times. Now we'll change the text of the first link to active and add the active class to the anchor tag. For accessibility, we'll also add a span tag with the text current and the class SR only. This will only be available for screen readers. We'll also change the text of the last link to disabled and add the disabled class to the anchor tag. Let's now have a look in the browser. There's not much to see for the active link, but we will see this later when we add more styles. To see how this nav component can be structured as a group of links instead, we'll remove the list items and the URL tag and add the class nav to the nav tag. When we look at it in the browser, we'll see the exact same visual style. Let's revert our code back to the example with the unordered list, since I believe this is better in terms of semantics. We can control the alignment of the nav component with Flexbox utility classes. If we want it to be centered, we'll add the class justified content center to the tag with the nav class, which in our case is the URL tag. Let's have a quick look in the browser. If we want it to be right aligned, we'll use the class justify content end instead. Let's have another look. If we want our nav component in the vertical direction, we'll use the class flex column. Let's see this in the browser. Let's remove the class again, so that we have a default nav component. And let's see how we can apply different styling to the links. If we want our links to appear as tabs, we simply add the class nav tabs. Let's see it in the browser. If we want our links to appear as pills, we use the class nav pills instead. Let's see this in the browser. We can extend our nav component to full width in 2 ways. Let's duplicate the code so it's easier to see the difference. In the first way, we will add the class nav fill, which will give the nav item different width. In the second way, we'll use the class nav justified, which will give the nav items equal width. Let's see this in the browser. Now we want to see how we can incorporate a drop-down into our nav component. We'll turn our second list item into a drop-down by first adding the class drop-down. The anchor tag will get the class dropdown toggle, and the data toggle attribute with the value dropdown. For accessibility, it will also get the role attribute with the value button, the area has pop-up attribute with the value true, and the area expanded attribute with the value false. Now we need to create our menu for the dropdown. This will be a div with the class dropdown menu. Inside it, we'll create a link with the class dropdown item and the text first item. We'll duplicate this link twice and change the text accordingly. Let's now see this in action. We will now see how we can create a Nav component with pane functionality. This is easiest done from scratch, so we'll delete our current example. We start with creating an unordered list with the classes nav and nav tabs, and the role attribute with the value tab list for accessibility. Inside this, we'll create a list item with the class nav item. Inside the nav item, we'll create an anchor tag with the href attribute referring to the tab content, which we'll create later on. We'll also give it a unique ID. Now we need to add the classes navlink and active, the data toggle attribute with the value tab, the role attribute with the value tab, the area controls attribute with the same value as the href attribute, and the area expanded attribute with the value true, since this is our active link. Finally, we will add some text to the link. We will now duplicate the nav item twice and change the values of the relevant attributes. Notice that these two nav items won't have the active class, and the value of the area expanded attribute will be false. Now we need to create the tab content. This consists of a container div with the class tab content. Inside this, we'll create another div with the class tab pane and active. The ID referring to the value of the href attribute from the anchor tag, the role attribute with the value tab panel, the area labeled by attribute with the value of the ID from the anchor tag, and the area expanded attribute with the value true, since this is our active link. Inside this div, we will also add a paragraph and paste in some lorem ipsum text. We will use the text of the link in the beginning of our paragraph, so it will be easier to distinguish from the other tab panes. We will now duplicate our tab pane twice and change the values of the relevant attributes and the text in the beginning of our paragraphs. Notice that these two tab panes won't have the active class, and the value of the area expanded attribute will be false. Now, let's see this in action. When we click the different tabs, the text content will change accordingly. Finally, let's see how we can add an animation effect to the tab panes. We do this simply by adding the class Fade to all of them, as well as the class Show to the active one. In the browser, we can now see a fading animation effect when we click the different links. We have now learned how to create different kinds of nav components, including how to style them as tabs and pills, and how to incorporate drop-down and paint functionality. Go on and continue with the coding exercise, which will help you learn the correct structure for this component. In the next lecture, we'll learn about the nav bar component.